Before I start with my topic as such, please allow me to shortly introduce my organization, what we are doing, since I know from personal experience that not everybody is familiar with our activities, especially outside of Germany. So, as you can see on the slide, well, my name is Dominic Otto, first of all, and I'm, as Viva already said, the Deputy CEO of the German Baltic Chamber of Commerce in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. We are covering all three countries. And before that, I worked for over 10 years for the Ergo Insurance Group here in the Baltic states as well. So, our Chamber of Commerce is basically a members organization, and we officially represent the German business side abroad. In our case here in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And this means that we are supporting German businesses to set foot in the Baltic countries, may it be via finding business partners here in our region or through the means of helping to set up or moving their entire business. And currently we have over 400 member companies throughout the Baltic states. And with this, we are also part of the HK network with 140 locations in 92 countries and around 51,000 members in total. But yeah, that's much just as a very short introduction so that you know where I'm coming from. Now let's move on to the main topic here in the next slide of my presentation, which is economic growth and strategic development of the Baltic Sea region, especially in the Baltic states. And for this, first, let's have a short glance at some economic KPIs of the three Baltic countries. As you can see here, the population of all three countries is not the biggest, and combined the total population doesn't even reach a full 6 million people. So, but yeah, even more, the population of all three countries has shrunken rather significantly, actually, I would say, percentage-wise in the past, mainly due to emigration. For example, Estonia recently was ranked the 23rd fastest shrinking country in the world, especially in 2004 and 2005 after joining the European Union, and then again in 2009 and 2010 as a consequence of the financial crisis. The population of all three countries took rather big hits. Luckily, the recent developments, partly surely influenced by the current corona situation, show a stabilization, if not even a reversal of this trend. Because in January 2020, so a year back, the Lithuanian Statistics Office reported that the population has grown for the first time actually in 28 years due to migration trends, and leading now to a population of almost 2.8 million, which is a good thing that the trend was partly reversed, but it is, however, still rather far away from the 3 million plus people when I first moved here to Lithuania back in 2007. On the other hand, GDP per capita is rather high in the Baltic states, which show that the economies of the three countries is relatively stable. But let's have a closer look at the GDP development on the next slide. As you can see in the chart here, the economies of the Baltic states developed in a rather stable way, with two significant slumps in recent history. One was in 2008-9, when the Baltic states were hit quite hard by the financial crisis, and the other now in 2020 and probably also in 2021 due to COVID, of course. Yeah. However, a balanced economy and comparatively mild health crisis, at least during the first wave, I would say, put the Baltic states actually in a rather good starting position on their path to recovery. A loosened fiscal regime provides here the opportunity, if executed competently, to address the problem of underinvestment and to improve also competitiveness and to create a more IT savvy and dynamic society. Especially in the IT sector, Estonia seems to be in a very good starting place here. But also the shortening of the supply chains is imminent and it's happening already and happened. But due to the favorable business environment and experience in attracting greenfield investments, the countries should be well positioned to benefit from a reshoring of manufacturing, especially Lithuania, when it comes to manufacturing. And I will touch the topic of reshoring a little bit later in my presentation. So on the next slide, we can see that there is another big factor, which is the rising unemployment. The COVID-19 pandemic has a significant influence on the unemployment rate in the Baltic states. However, on the other hand, this is a global challenge, of course, since most countries had to undergo already at least two hard lockdowns, which hit the labor-intensive sectors such as tourism and gastronomy especially hard. So official forecasts here show that the unemployment will actually continue to rise in the first half of 2021, but hopefully and likely to slow down then as the vaccination process has been largely made. So hopefully by the beginning of the second half of this year. And after that, the economy will or should start to recover when the restrictions can be lifted again. On the next slide, main goods exported. Usually the main driver of a recovery after a crisis. So if you look at the Baltic countries, which of course speaks for the very high digitalization of the country, whereas Latvia and Lithuania have a stronger focus on the wood industry and also, especially in Lithuania, on the car manufacturing industry. On the next slide, we can see, and let's have another brief glance here at the most important export countries of the Baltic states. And this slide shows that the Baltic countries exchange goods among themselves, of course, but also with Scandinavia and also especially Germany. Russia also plays a rather significant role in the export outlook. And what is interesting is that both Latvia and Lithuania have a strong trading partnership with the UK. Well, however, due to the Brexit, the Latvian Investment and Development Agency and the Lithuanian government both estimate declines in the exports to the UK, which is to no one a surprise, especially in the service sector and the tourism sector. And the Brexit is most likely to have the biggest negative impact on the SMEs, and the small, medium enterprises, which is the backbone of the Baltic economies. There is a European Union and United Kingdom, they agreed to a free trade agreement temporarily until, for a limited time period until the end of February this year. So then afterwards, in the long term or even short term, that is, the Brexit will have an impact since the free movement of persons and goods, services and capital between the UK and the European Union will come to an end. And with this, the creation of two separate markets will bring barriers to trade in goods and services, and this will have an impact on the Baltic states, especially Latvia and Lithuania, I would say. So now on the next slide, as I was mentioning this, because as you can see here, export-led subsectors tend to bounce back faster than non-export-led ones. So this is a good sign for the Baltic states, for Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, as all three countries register an export quota from roughly 60% in Latvia and a very significant export rate of 77% in Lithuania. Just for comparison, the world average amounts to approximately 43%. So you can see that all three countries rely heavily on their exports and their export trading partners. This is also why I was showing this before. So studies have actually shown that exports played a leading role in the recovery after the previous recession, so after the financial crisis in the European Union and the UK, making up almost 95% increase in GDP in the first year post-recession, meaning that basically almost the entire recovery after the first crisis or after this crisis in the first year was based on exports. Of course, there were a few exceptions, especially in service exports, where only a very few sectors experienced an immediate boost. But here, for example, programming experienced this boost, and again, this seems to be very favorable for Estonia. On the other hand, vehicle and high-tech manufacturing are likely to boost the export, which here is a good sign and a big chance for the Baltics, especially Lithuania, with its rather high share of car manufacturing industry, as we have seen before. And yeah, some sectors actually struggled heavily after the 2008 recession because they were lumbered with structural issues related to productivity and cost competitiveness. So this means that now is a big chance to invest even more in automation and digitization, and in order to achieve the appropriate cost competitiveness. Also, as we've just seen before, with the speaking person before me. So now on the next slide, yeah, I would like to touch another strategic possibility, because this one possible strategic direction for the Baltic states, or namely the further focusing on the export and at the same time investing in the local infrastructure, especially the digital infrastructure. I think if we can manage this, or if the Baltic states can manage this, all three countries should be rather well positioned for the time after the crisis and the subsequent recovery that is hopefully to be taking place. Now, as a second point, I would like to briefly touch on the topic of supply chains. It was a big topic also throughout the media like half a year ago. And with this respect, I would also like to discuss the possible mitigation measure here of reshoring and how this can also become one strategic development for the Baltic states. So now what I would like to do is first have a look at the situation of supply chain before, then during, and also after the crisis. And so before the current situation, more than 1/3 of the worldwide produced goods were coming from China, probably to no one's surprise again. But with this, China became basically the world's factory since its entry to the WTO. And since 2016, China is, for example, Germany's biggest trade partner, but not only Germany's. McKinsey found out that the world economy is now 3 times more dependent from China than it was back in 2007. And here, car manufacturing and the chemical industries are especially affected. But now with the worldwide shutdown of entire industries, closed down productions, and the closing of borders, there is a collapse of international supply chain and also partial bottlenecks, especially in the pharmaceutical and medical sector. And this leads me to the next slide, slide number 10, to the time after COVID, after the Corona crisis. At the very top of possible consequences is a possible de-globalization. But this is not a new development at all, actually. The USA is already trying for some time now to decouple the American economy from the Chinese one. Simply put, just not to be so dependent anymore. So we can say that the Corona crisis is merely accelerating an already ongoing development. Also, a recently conducted survey in Germany showed that 50%, and so half of all respondents, see the globalization as a risk. So basically the crisis right now has strengthened merely the awareness how vulnerable we are as a society and also our economies in times of the current hyper globalization that we have. So in a globally connected world that we have right now, pandemics can simply spread much faster, and thus also globally spread supply chains can be cut much faster as well. And what closed borders are certainly the wrong answer, at least in the long term, to the challenges of the globalization. Maybe now to the pandemic, but not to the globalization as such. Rather, should we build our economies on a solid foundation? And this might mean for the USA, for example, to relocate some of their production facilities back from Mexico, for example, or for Europe, this could mean a relocation of production facilities from, let's say, China to the Baltic Sea region. And this brings me now, the next slide, to my second possible strategic development that I wanted to briefly touch here, which is reshoring. So as I just mentioned, reshoring basically describes just the practice of bringing manufacturing or services back to a certain country from usually overseas. It's basically a fast and efficient way to strengthen the local economy because it helps balance possible trade and budget deficits. But also it can reduce unemployment by creating a good, well-paying manufacturing jobs, and thus also foster a skilled local workforce. Now, as mentioned before, for many European countries, especially German companies, reshoring could mean bringing back the production facilities from China closer to their doorsteps, which in many cases could mean our region here, the Baltic Sea region. And by the way, this is already happening. It's an accelerating process right now, and we as the Chamber of Commerce are getting more and more requests for supporting or for support for doing exactly this, finding investments and relocation opportunities here in the Baltic states. So more and more German companies, which I can report from personal experience, are contacting us and asking, about the opportunities and possibilities here in the Baltic states. And the benefits for the Baltic countries, of course, are immense. I've already mentioned them. It's strengthening the local economy and reduce unemployment. So exactly the two main factors influenced by the crisis, which I showed at the very beginning of the presentation. But of course, also for the companies doing the reshoring, this holds many benefits, which would be, for example, to ensure the continuing of the operations of the manufacturing businesses, since the supply chain between, let's say, Germany and the Baltic states can be much harder interrupted than a supply chain between Germany and, let's say, China. And also this can support post-crisis manufacturing growth simply by reducing the complexity of the supply chain for the respective company. Yeah, so coming to an end of my presentation here, in summary, I would say that all Baltic states should focus on further attracting, and I really say further because all three countries are already doing this, but yeah, strengthening the efforts here in attracting foreign businesses and using this chance right now, where many companies really are considering this step in order to cope with the current situation and the consequences of this. Yeah, and this brings me to the end of my presentation. I could continue and show you many reasons why it is a good reason to reshore here to the Baltic states. Have I shown you, for example, the ease of doing a business index where all three Baltic countries are really high up. But I think it's enough now, and if I look at the time, my time is up anyway. So thank you very much for listening, and yes, thank you.